Hi, my name's Tommy Ricketts. I'm the CEO and co-founder of BeZero Carbon. 2 years ago, my friend and I were in Japan watching the Rugby World Cup. I was taking a welcome break from being a banker in New York, and he'd just finished an international music tour. Talking about climate change, my friend was very concerned about the environmental impact of touring. He wanted to know how to become a carbon neutral artist and asked me about these things called offsets. Were they useful or were they really just greenwashing? Just like that, BeZero Carbon was born. By the time I'd left Japan, my co-founder and I had agreed to resign, and I even went so far as tattooing zero in Japanese on my arm just to make sure I wouldn't get cold feet. There was no turning back. We knew we wanted to work in the emerging climate industry, but we're also sick of the doom and gloom that surrounds climate change. Negative visions rarely lead to positive change. We wanted to show that prosperity and climate action can go hand in hand, something that hasn't been the case for the past 250 years. To explain why, I want to refer to Isaiah Berlin's fable, The Hedgehog and the Fox. Berlin saw two types of thinkers: hedgehogs who have one big idea and foxes that have lots of little ones. Now, for the past 250 years, we've been hedgehogs. We've known one big thing, and that big thing is that burning fossilized carbon makes life simpler and makes society more prosperous. Population levels have soared alongside living standards. This is a big idea. The problem we forgot is that humans exist within a global ecology. Our natural resources are not an everlasting gobstopper. Burning ever more fossilized carbon has permanent and irrevocable consequences. Avoiding these consequences is a global imperative. How do we start replacing perhaps the greatest idea in human history? And there are many answers to this, many small ideas. And I'll talk about one today that goes back to that question that my friend asked me in Japan. How do we know if carbon offsetting is useful or really just greenwashing? There are carbon projects around the world set up to avoid carbon emissions, such as conservation of carbon-rich wildlife in forests or mangroves, and new forms of technologies that have permanent carbon removal, such as direct air capture. After being certified as legitimate by accreditation bodies like Verra, these projects can issue credits based on a range of methodologies. Each carbon credit is supposed to equal 1 ton of carbon avoided or removed. Since 2002, nearly 19,000 registered projects have come into existence, issuing credits equivalent to 4.3 billion tons of CO2. And prices range wildly, from as low as 10 cents per credit to as high as a staggering $1,000. This story of carbon projects and offsets is a description of what's called the voluntary carbon market. And it's an extremely bullish market. Transacted volumes are set to rise from 1 to 2 billion today to 100 billion by 2030. However, there is a problem with the offset market, a problem that goes back to the Kyoto Protocol and also back to the very beginning of this talk. How do we know that 1 carbon credit is really worth a ton of carbon? How do we know which projects are truly doing what they claim? And how do we know which ones we should invest in to be sure that they're taking effective climate action? The short answer is we don't. BeZero's team of carbon credit scientists conducted research to see if we could actually assess these questions. We regressed the transactions of 110 carbon projects against the BeZero carbon rating to see if price is correlated to quality. This is a basic hallmark of a scalable market. For those that haven't encountered this R-squared test before, a score of 1 would suggest there is a perfect relationship between price and quality. A score of 0 would imply there is none. Our study found an R-squared of just 0.077. In other words, buying a carbon credit for $5 or $400 doesn't necessarily mean that it's achieving its core function, to avoid or remove a ton of carbon. Project prices may reflect other things called co-benefits, such as UN Sustainable Development Goals, but they aren't called SDG credits. Co-benefits are additional. Carbon returns are core. Prices should reflect carbon quality. Certification bodies do a fantastic job of creating the methodologies used to generate credits. But our research calls into question the idea that all tons are created equal. Like financial assets, assessing carbon projects is about a spectrum of risks. Like financial assets, there are lots of factors which can make a carbon project effective or put that efficacy at risk. Unlike financial assets, however, many of the inputs and outputs are based on scientific modelling, which is either unobservable or reliant on samples. This is why we created the B0 carbon rating methodology. It blends traditional financial and ecological modelling frameworks to assess the extent to which any given carbon project truly delivers a ton of CO2 avoidance or reduction. First, we define key risk factors common to all types of carbon projects, whatever the sector. Our 6-factor model assesses additionality, overcrediting, permanence, leakage, political environment, and perverse incentives. Second, we assess each individual risk factor based on a blend of qualitative and quantitative top-down and bottom-up analysis. Third, we calculate the carbon project rating based on a weighted average of each individual risk score. Finally, we monitor and track performance dynamically via satellite imagery tools for nature-based solutions, as well as up-to-date secondary news and research. We apply this methodology for projects around the world on our intelligence platform, B0 Carbon Markets. Our platform offers an additional and universal layer of analysis for anyone operating in the voluntary carbon market who wants to make a project, invest in a project, or buy and sell credits. When we talked about the big idea of the past 250 years, it was all based on burning fossilized fuels. If we are to avert the worst of its effects, we will need many small ideas. Small ideas like how to ensure the best carbon projects get the funding they need to deliver climate action. We believe our approach is quietly radical. It allows people to compare projects and assess the associated risks in a truly fungible way. It helps get us closer to answering the very first question we began this talk with. A question many of you listening would have no doubt asked yourselves. What are carbon credits? Are they useful, or are they really just greenwashing? If B0 can help answer this question, we believe the carbon market can become a source of climate action and wealth creation. So after 250 years of being a hedgehog, I think it's time we rediscover our inner fox.